June 12, 2005. Two experienced woodsmen head up to a cabin in Canada's Nahanni National Park for a wilderness hunting trip. After giving them the keys, the cabin owner would leave the men to settle in at the property. What he would find when he returned a few days later was absolutely bizarre. The two men were nowhere to be found, and what they left behind was very puzzling. Unbeknownst to the cabin owner, however, this was just the start of a perplexing mystery. David Horace and Frederick Hardesty were two longtime friends who were described as inseparable by those who knew them. They were from Fort Simpson, a village in the Decho region of the Northwest Territories in Canada, which is also home to the famous Nahanni National Park Reserve. Since the two were avid bushmen, they often took advantage of the abundant nature around them and frequently went on hunting trips at the park. This is exactly what David and Frederick had planned for June 12th of 2005. Early in the morning that day, they set off to the cabin of Rod Gunderson, who was a good friend of the two men. It was situated roughly 80 miles northwest of Fort Simpson. Once they arrived, Rod helped them settle in and left the property soon after. This would be the last time that Rod ever saw the two men. On June 16th, Rod decided to check up on David and Frederick as he had not heard from them since 4 days prior. When he returned to the cabin, he made a startling discovery. The doors were locked, but upon entering, he quickly realized that the two men weren't there. At first, he suspected they were just out hunting until he saw that all the guns the men had brought with them were still at the cabin. The mystery only deepened when Rod noticed several bullet holes around the cabin, in the walls, and on the floor. By this point, Rod had seen enough and quickly called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They soon arrived at the property, and the following day, an extensive search for the two men began. The forest surrounding the cabin was combed for any clues over the following week, but nothing was found, and the search was eventually called off on the 23rd. Family, friends, and volunteers from Fort Simpson, as well as other local communities, continued the effort to find the two men, however. Just a few days later, they stumbled onto one of them. On June 27th, the remains of David Horace were discovered in thick bush over 2 miles away from the cabin. Upon closer examination, the searchers noticed something bizarre. Jonas Antoine, a friend of both the men who was part of the search effort, said that David's hands and arms were covered in burns. This stood out as bizarre because there was no logical explanation as to how David could have gotten burned so badly, and it didn't make sense to Jonas. Following the discovery, the RCMP was contacted, and David's remains were flown to Edmonton for an autopsy. Now that he had been found, the search effort was increased. Police brought in search dogs as well as personnel, and more community members also joined the team. On July 8th, Frederick Hardesty's remains were finally found as well, floating in the North Nahanni River over 12 miles away from the cabin. The location of where he was discovered was perplexing to many. It was in an area that had already been previously searched numerous times by multiple teams on different days. It's very unlikely that they would have missed him, leading some to speculate that he had been placed there sometime during the search. A few days after Frederick was found, the RCMP would hold a press conference to provide an update on the case. Police told the public that David had died of hypothermia and Frederick had drowned, according to the coroner's autopsy reports. These results led friends and family to question what may have happened to them. It was difficult to understand how two men could have died on a hunting trip from different causes and had been discovered so far apart from each other. The RCMP's handling of the case was even more difficult to understand, however. Despite the strange circumstances surrounding the deaths of the men, the RCMP ruled that there was no foul play involved. They ignored many signs of a struggle, such as the bullet holes found at the cabin. Frederick's brother, Robert Hardesty, who was also part of the search, said in a news interview that, quote, "There's so much evidence they didn't look at that we found. He went on to mention that Frederick's shirt was discovered with a big hole in it, which appeared to have been done with a shotgun, according to him. Still, they didn't believe this to be clear-cut evidence of foul play. The Hardesty family even filed a complaint with the RCMP regarding how they handled the case. However, an internal investigation concluded that there was nothing wrong with how it was conducted. This left the men's families, as well as the Fort Simpson community, very unsatisfied. David's stepbrother, Joseph Horace, said during an interview that, quote, "The picture is bigger than just two guys, one who died of hypothermia and the other who died of drowning. There was something else that happened before all that came down." Many people agreed with this sentiment and even believed that the RCMP may have had an ulterior reason for not investigating the case properly, although it's unclear what that could have been. Despite numerous attempts by both the men's families to get police back on the case over the years, it was never reopened and remains a mystery to this day. Our deepest condolences go out to the families and friends of David Horace and Frederick Hardesty.